I thought the black garbage bags sitting on the front porch were a terrible joke. It was the sunny morning of my 18th birthday. For my entire life, my mother had treated me like a royal princess, constantly telling me it was just us girls against the cruel world because my deadbeat father had abandoned us. So, when I woke up and saw my entire life packed into heavy bags by the front door, I thought she was surprising me with new luggage for a birthday trip. Instead, she was sitting at the kitchen table with a small calculator today. She looked up at me, completely devoid of any emotion, and said the words that ruined my life. "Happy birthday. The child support legally ended at midnight. You are now a financial liability and I need you out by noon." I was completely homeless in a matter of a few short hours. Before I go on, if this story resonates with you, hit like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely connect with it. Drop your city and local time in the comments. So, I made a desperate phone call to the father I had not spoken to in years. The man who answered that call was not the terrible monster my mother always told me he was. He was the man who was about to help me dismantle her entire life. To understand the absolute depth of my shock, you have to understand exactly how I was raised. For 18 years, my mother played the role of a fiercely devoted, single superhero. She made sure I always had the newest smartphone. We took yearly trips to expensive beach resorts. She drove a pristine luxury car. Whenever I asked how we afforded our beautiful home while she only worked part-time at a boutique, she would just smile and talk about her excellent budgeting skills. She always reminded me that my dad was a selfish deadbeat who contributed absolutely nothing to our daily survival. I believed every single word. I worshipped her. I thought our bond was unbreakable. So, standing there in my pajamas on the sunny morning of my 18th birthday, staring at 3 massive black trash bags filled with my clothes, my brain simply could not process the terrible reality of the situation. The woman sitting at the kitchen table did not look like my loving mother anymore. Her posture was rigid. Her eyes were entirely cold. The warm, affectionate mask she had worn for my entire childhood had been seamlessly removed, revealing a calculating, heartless stranger underneath. I stood there completely paralyzed in total disbelief. "Mom, what is going on?" I whispered, my voice trembling loudly. "Why are my things packed up?" She took a slow sip of her coffee and tapped a manicured fingernail against the screen of her small calculator. "I just explained it to you, darling," she sighed, sounding mildly annoyed by my confusion. "You are officially a legal adult today. That means the state mandate for child support is officially terminated. I will no longer be receiving the monthly deposit of $3,500 from your father's bank account. The funding has stopped, which means your free ride has officially ended." The harsh words hit me like a physical punch to the stomach. $3,500 a month? My mind raced fast, desperately trying to piece together the puzzle. She had always sworn my dad never sent a single dime. She had painted him as a villain who refused to support his own flesh and blood at all. Yet, here she was, casually admitting she had been collecting a massive tax-free salary for simply keeping me under her roof. I was not her beloved daughter. I was a highly lucrative business asset. And as of midnight last night, my profitable contract had permanently expired. "But I am your daughter," I sobbed, tears finally spilling over my cheeks and dropping onto the collar of my shirt. "Where am I supposed to go?" "I am still in high school. I only work weekends at the grocery store. I do not have enough savings for a small apartment right now." She did not flinch. She did not offer a hug. She simply shrugged her shoulders, an incredibly callous gesture that shattered whatever illusions I had left. "That is not my problem anymore," she stated flatly. "You should have planned better. I have a mortgage to pay, and you are a financial liability." Noon. I realized begging was absolutely useless. I turned around and walked slowly back to my bedroom. The posters were stripped from the walls. The closet was completely empty. She had meticulously packed everything while I was sleeping. The sheer premeditation of the terrible act was truly terrifying. I grabbed my backpack, threw my laptop inside, and carried the heavy garbage bags out to the front porch. The suburban street was quiet. The morning sun was shining brightly, and my entire universe had just collapsed. I sat down on the concrete steps, completely numb. Alone. I pulled out my phone and scrolled past my friends, knowing they could not take me in. I needed a massive miracle. Deep in my contacts, untouched for 6 agonizing years, was the number of the man my mother warned me about. I took a deep breath and pressed the green button to call. The phone rang once. It rang twice. With every passing second, my heart hammered violently against my ribs, threatening to break completely through my chest. I sat on the hard concrete steps of the house I had grown up in, entirely surrounded by the ugly black garbage bags that now contained my entire life. The morning sun was shining brightly, but I felt nothing but freezing. Absolute terror. I was terrified he would simply ignore the call. I was terrified he would answer and immediately scream at me. My mother had spent 18 years telling me he hated me deeply. She told me he was a selfish, violent monster who never wanted a daughter and who abandoned us the moment things got slightly difficult. She ingrained this terrifying image into my brain so deeply that I had actively blocked his phone number when I was 12 years old, demanding he leave us completely alone forever. I had sent him a cruel, terrible email on my 14th birthday telling him I wished he was dead. I had completely believed every single horrible lie she had ever spun. And now, I was calling him to desperately beg for a very massive favor. Just as I was about to hang up the phone and accept my terrible fate as a homeless teenager, the ringing suddenly stopped. There was a sharp click, followed by a heavy silence on the line. Then, a deep, raspy voice spoke softly through the small speaker. "Hello? Alex? Is that really you?" My breath hitched sharply in my throat. I squeezed my eyes shut tightly, desperately trying to hold back a massive wave of fresh tears. His voice did not sound angry at all. He sounded completely shocked, incredibly breathless, and overwhelmingly sad. "Yes, it is me," I whispered. "I am so sorry to bother you today," I choked out, my voice trembling wildly. I did not know who else to call right now. My mother just kicked me out of the house. It is my 18th birthday today, and she said the child support payments stopped, so I am a financial liability. I am sitting on the curb with all my clothes in garbage bags, and I have absolutely nowhere else to go. Please do not hang up on me. I am so sorry for everything I said before. I just need a little bit of help today." There was a long, agonizing pause on the other end of the line. For a terrible moment, I thought my mother had been completely right. I thought he was going to laugh cruelly at my pain, tell me I was entirely on my own now, and hang up the phone forever. Instead, I heard a sharp, sudden intake of breath, followed by the distinct sound of car keys jingling loudly in the background. "Alex, listen to me very carefully," he said, his voice suddenly thick, with fierce emotion and ironclad determination. "Are you safe right now in this exact moment?" "Yes, I am just sitting outside the house," I replied, wiping my wet face with the back of my trembling hand. "Okay. Do not move an inch," he commanded gently but firmly. "I live exactly 4 hours away from your town. I am walking to my car right now. I am going to drive straight to you. Do not talk to your mother if she comes outside. Do not go anywhere with anyone else. Just stay right there on the curb with your bags, and I will be there as fast as humanly possible. I am coming for you today." He did not ask for a lengthy apology. He did not demand a painful explanation for the 6 years of absolute silence. He did not weaponize my intense vulnerability to score petty points or punish me for believing her completely cruel lies. The man I had been taught to hate my entire life dropped absolutely everything in a single second to cross the state for me. I lowered the phone from my ear, staring blindly at the dark screen. For the first time all morning, a tiny, fragile spark of genuine hope ignited inside my dark, heavy, breaking heart now. The next 4 hours were the longest, most agonizing hours of my entire life. I sat perfectly still on the hard concrete curb, baking in the hot afternoon sun. A few neighbors walked their dogs past my house, casting confused, pitying glances at the sobbing teenager sitting alone next to a pile of shiny black trash bags. My mother never came outside to check on me. She never even peeked through the front window blinds. As far as she was concerned, I was completely gone. I was just forgotten garbage waiting patiently for the neighborhood sanitation truck to finally arrive. Finally, exactly 4 hours and 12 minutes after I had made that desperate phone call, a sleek, dark silver sedan turned slowly onto my quiet suburban street. It was not a broken-down, rusted-out junker like my mother had always claimed my father drove. It was a beautiful, meticulously clean car. It pulled up directly to the curb where I was sitting and shifted into park. The engine cut off quietly. The heavy driver's side door opened swiftly, and a tall, broadly built man stepped out onto the bright pavement. My estranged father had finally arrived to save me. The man who stepped out of the silver sedan was absolutely nothing like the terrifying monster my mother had described for 18 years. He was not wearing dirty, ragged clothes, and he did not look like a completely destitute, angry failure. Instead, he was dressed in a very sharp, meticulously pressed navy blue business suit. His dark hair was neatly styled, though perfectly silver at the temples now. As he stood there on the bright suburban street, looking at me sitting next to my shiny black garbage bags, I saw that his eyes were incredibly red and filled with tears. He did not yell at me. He did not ask why I had been so terribly cruel to him for 6 long years. He simply walked over, dropped to his knees on the hard concrete sidewalk, and pulled me into the warmest, tightest hug I had ever experienced in my entire life. I buried my face into his shoulder and sobbed uncontrollably. He just held me tightly, gently rubbing my back while whispering that everything was going to be perfectly fine now. After a few long minutes, he stood up and silently began loading my heavy bags into his trunk. I climbed into the passenger seat of his beautiful vehicle. The leather was incredibly soft, and the cabin smelled faintly of expensive cedar and fresh coffee. It was an environment that radiated intense safety and quiet stability. As he closed the trunk and slid behind the steering wheel, I glanced nervously toward the front door of my childhood home. The heavy wooden door remained firmly shut. My mother had not even bothered to look outside to see who was taking her only daughter away. My dad followed my sad gaze, his strong jaw tightening slightly, but he stayed completely silent. He put the car into drive and slowly pulled away from the curb forever. The first hour of our long drive was filled with an incredibly thick, heavy silence. I stared out the passenger window, watching the familiar suburban streets slowly fade into endless stretches of green highway trees. My mind was completely overwhelmed by the massive betrayal I had just suffered. My mother had sold my entire childhood for $3,500 a month. When the monthly payments finally dried up, she tossed me out into the street like the garbage of yesterday without any hesitation whatsoever. Eventually, my dad cleared his throat softly and offered me a gentle, reassuring smile. "Are you feeling hungry at all, sweetie?" he asked quietly, his voice full of genuine concern and deep warmth. "We still have a few hours left on the road, and we can stop anywhere you would like to eat." The absolute kindness in his simple question made fresh tears prick my tired eyes. He was not demanding any answers. He was not rubbing my face in the painful fact that she had been completely right all along. He just wanted to make sure I was okay. I shook my head slowly, unable to speak around the huge lump forming in my dry throat. We continued our quiet journey across the beautiful state. As the miles rolled by, I began to seriously evaluate the massive web of terrible lies my mother had carefully constructed. She had always insisted that my father was completely destitute, living in absolute squalor in a terrible neighborhood. But as we finally exited the wide highway and drove into his actual city, I quickly realized she had lied about absolutely everything. We pulled into a stunning, heavily wooded, highly affluent suburban neighborhood together. He parked the silver sedan in the wide driveway of a gorgeous, two-story brick home. The front lawn was meticulously manicured, and a welcoming front porch was lined with beautiful, brightly colored potted plants. It was not a broken-down shack. It was an incredibly beautiful, massive, family home that radiated immense peace and total security. He turned off the engine, unbuckled his seatbelt, and offered me another incredibly gentle, totally patient smile. "We are finally home," he said softly, stepping out of the car to carefully retrieve my heavy garbage bags from the trunk of the vehicle. I followed him up the front steps like a completely lost ghost. When he unlocked the heavy front door and stepped inside, I was instantly enveloped by the wonderful smell of baking spices and incredibly clean laundry. The interior was perfectly decorated, full of warm light, extremely comfortable furniture, and countless framed family photographs lining the bright hallway walls. I felt completely overwhelmed by the stark, amazing contrast between this deeply warm sanctuary and the totally cold, calculating prison I had just escaped from earlier today. He set my bags down carefully and gestured gently down the main hallway. "Let me show you to your personal room," he said softly, walking slowly toward the very end of the long corridor. I expected a hastily prepared guest room with a dusty, uncomfortable couch or a completely empty office space. Instead, he stopped in front of a beautiful white door and turned the small brass handle. The door swung open, revealing a completely stunning, entirely furnished teenage bedroom. It was painted my absolute favorite color, filled with new books, perfectly matching soft blankets, and wonderful art. He had kept this incredibly beautiful room completely ready for me for 6 entire years. I stepped slowly into the beautiful bedroom, my trembling hands reaching out to gently touch the incredibly soft blankets folded neatly on the wide bed. Every single detail in this quiet sanctuary was absolutely perfect. The walls were painted a very soft shade of lavender, which had always been my favorite color since I was a little girl. There were empty wooden picture frames waiting patiently on the bright white desk, completely ready to hold brand new memories. I stood perfectly still in the center of the soft carpet, my mind completely overwhelmed by this massive display of pure love. My dad stood quietly in the open doorway, watching me absorb the beautiful reality of the room he had carefully prepared for me. He did not say a single word to break the heavy, emotional silence. Instead, he simply turned around and walked down the long hallway toward his own bedroom. A few minutes later, he returned carrying a heavy, dark gray metal lockbox in his strong hands. He walked over to the edge of my new mattress and sat down slowly, patting the soft blanket right next to him. "Alex," he said softly, "please come sit with me now." I wiped my tearful eyes and sat down nervously beside him. He unlocked the small metal clasp with a tiny silver key and pushed the heavy lid backward. Inside the deep box were hundreds of thick white envelopes, all neatly bundled together with tight rubber bands. Every single envelope was heavily covered in bright red ink. He pulled out the very first stack and gently placed it into my lap. "These are all the letters I wrote to you over the last 6 years," he explained quietly, his voice breaking slightly as he looked deeply into my highly confused eyes. I stared down at the massive stack of thick envelopes. My name was written perfectly on every single one, but right across my address was a bold red stamp that read, "Return to sender." My mother had intercepted every single letter, birthday card, and holiday greeting he had ever mailed to our house. She had maliciously marked them as rejected and shipped them right back to his empty mailbox. For 6 agonizing years, he had tried desperately to reach out to me, and for 6 long years she had built an incredibly thick, completely invisible brick wall between us entirely. My hands shook violently as I carefully pulled the thick rubber band off the letters, but there was absolutely more hiding beneath them. He reached into the dark metal lockbox again and pulled out a thick, yellow manila folder. He opened it slowly, revealing hundreds of printed bank statements dating back over a decade. He pointed to a specific line on the very first page. Every single month, on the exact same day, there was an incredibly clear transfer of $3,500 directly into my mother's personal checking account. He had never missed a single required payment. I stared blankly at the staggering financial numbers on the crisp paper. The awful, brutal reality of my entire childhood suddenly snapped into crystal clear focus right before my wide eyes. The expensive beach vacations, the pristine luxury cars, the endless shopping sprees at the massive mall. None of it was funded by my mother's part-time boutique job. She had been living an incredibly lavish, totally comfortable lifestyle, funded entirely by the exact man she relentlessly trained me to hate. She was not a superhero at all. She was simply a massive parasite, draining his bank account completely dry. Finally, he pulled a thick stack of highly official legal documents from the very bottom of the heavy lockbox. I read the terrifying words printed on the stark, white pages. They were extremely detailed court records from years of incredibly bitter custody battles. My father had spent tens of thousands of dollars fighting desperately to see me again, but my mother had maliciously weaponized the terrible family court system against him entirely. She repeatedly claimed he was a severe danger to my mental health, using my own, completely brainwashed fear and extreme anger as her absolute primary terrible weapon always. The crushing, devastating realization of her incredible manipulation hit me with the intense force of a speeding freight train. She had not protected me from a terrible monster. She had carefully held me as a helpless, entirely oblivious hostage for a guaranteed monthly paycheck. The exact moment the lucrative money legally dried up on my 18th birthday today, she callously dumped me on the street without a second thought at all. She never actually loved me deeply. She only loved the massive financial security I unknowingly provided her. The terrible truth was absolutely suffocating, dark, and incredibly painful to accept. I dropped the heavy legal papers onto the soft carpet and completely broke down into loud, hysterical tears again. My dad instantly wrapped his incredibly strong arms around my shaking shoulders tightly. He held me closely as I sobbed out years of deeply misdirected anger and massive regret. I apologized endlessly for every single terrible thing I had ever said to him. He just gently kissed the top of my head repeatedly, whispering softly that he completely forgave me forever. I was no longer a helpless victim today. I was absolutely ready to build a brand new life together now. The morning sun filtered brightly through the soft lavender curtains of my beautiful new bedroom. I woke up slowly, momentarily disoriented by the incredibly peaceful silence filling the massive house. For a split second, I thought I was still trapped in my old suburban nightmare, but the heavy reality of yesterday quickly washed over my tired mind. I sat up on the soft mattress, staring blankly at the dark metal lockbox still resting on the small desk. The horrible truth of my completely stolen childhood was locked inside that heavy metal case, fundamentally rewriting every single memory I possessed forever. I walked slowly into the bright kitchen where my dad was pouring 2 hot cups of fresh coffee. He offered me a very warm, extremely gentle smile as I sat down at the large wooden table. As I took a long sip of the warm liquid, my racing mind began furiously connecting the terrible dots of my past. I vividly remembered my mother buying a brand new designer handbag every single spring. She always proudly claimed she had carefully saved her tiny boutique wages for months to afford the luxurious leather, demanding I praise her completely fake financial discipline immediately. She drove an incredibly expensive German luxury vehicle that she casually replaced every 3 years, without fail. When I asked her how she afforded the massive lease payments, She would just laugh softly and tell me that a single mother always deserves nice things. Meanwhile, she constantly complained about paying for my basic school supplies or essential dental visits. She would guilt-trip me relentlessly over the terrible cost of a simple winter coat, aggressively reminding me that money was incredibly tight because my completely worthless father refused to contribute a single red cent to our basic daily survival fund. The sickening truth was absolutely undeniable now. Every single one of those incredibly expensive designer purchases was completely funded by my innocent existence. My presence in her entirely pristine house was simply a highly profitable business arrangement that netted her $42,000 every single calendar year. She had intentionally forced me to believe I was a massive financial burden while secretly using my child support to live like absolute royalty. I was nothing more than a human paycheck to her, and she had maliciously isolated me from my only loving father to protect her massive income stream entirely. I looked across the kitchen table at my incredibly quiet father. He was gently holding his warm coffee mug, his kind eyes watching me process this terrible reality. "Why did you not just come to my school to see me?" I asked softly, my voice trembling with profound sadness. "Why did you let her completely win the battle for so many years?" He let out a very long, terribly heavy sigh and placed his cup down gently on the smooth wooden surface. His broad shoulders slumped deeply, revealing the massive weight of the intense sorrow he had quietly carried inside. "She threatened to have me arrested for harassment if I ever stepped foot near your high school campus," he explained quietly. "She obtained a completely fake restraining order by telling the terrible family court judge that my mere presence caused you extreme psychological distress. The deeply biased legal system fully believed her completely fabricated tears. If I had forcefully tried to see you against her explicit legal wishes, I would have gone straight to a dark prison cell. I legally had absolutely no other choice but to patiently wait until you turned 18 to finally reach out to you directly." My completely broken heart ached fiercely for the massive agony he had endured entirely alone. He had faithfully paid an absolute fortune every single month, just to ensure I had a roof over my innocent head, knowing fully well that my manipulative mother was gleefully spending the vast majority of it on her own extreme vanity. He had swallowed his massive pride, accepted the terrible villain role she forced upon him, and quietly waited in the painful shadows for 6 entire years. He sacrificed his own personal happiness entirely just to keep me safely insulated from her extreme wrath always. As I sat there processing his incredible sacrifice, my profound sadness rapidly morphed into a fiercely burning, intense anger. My mother had ruthlessly stolen my entire childhood. She had deliberately robbed me of a deeply loving father just to fund her incredibly shallow, entirely fake lifestyle. She had thrown me out like completely useless garbage the exact moment her lucrative payday finally expired. I suddenly realized that my entire previous existence was nothing but a carefully constructed financial transaction. I wiped my wet eyes forcefully, suddenly feeling an entirely new, incredibly powerful sense of absolute resolve washing over my soul. I looked directly into my father's incredibly kind, totally patient eyes. "I am never going back to that terrible woman again," I stated firmly, my voice completely devoid of any previous hesitation. She thought she could entirely destroy my life by kicking me out onto the cold street today, but she actually gave me the greatest possible gift ever. She finally set me free from her terrible cage. My dad smiled very brightly, reaching across the smooth wooden table to gently squeeze my small hand. "We are going to build a completely wonderful new life together now," he promised proudly. After breakfast, my father and I moved to his incredibly comfortable living room couch. The morning sun continued to stream brightly through the large windows, casting a warm, golden glow over the expensive hardwood floors. I sat quietly, pulling a soft throw blanket entirely over my lap. My mind began to fast forward toward my terrifyingly uncertain future now. My high school graduation was just 2 short months away, and I suddenly realized I had absolutely no tangible plans. My mother had never discussed my college options, repeatedly claiming that higher education was far too expensive for our tight budget. I looked down at my shaking hands, a massive wave of fresh anxiety washing over my completely exhausted body. "Dad," I whispered nervously, staring at the floor. "I do not know what to do about school next year at all. I have excellent grades, but I do not have a single dollar saved for university tuition. She always told me I would just have to take out massive student loans and work 3 jobs to survive. I am absolutely terrified that my entire adult life is already ruined before I even get the chance to finally start it properly today." My dad leaned forward instantly, a profoundly warm and totally confident smile breaking across his incredibly handsome face. He reached out and gently placed his large, comforting hand directly over my trembling fingers. "Alex, please take a very deep breath right now," he instructed softly. "You do not need to worry about taking out a single terrible student loan. I knew exactly who your mother was all those years ago. I knew she was highly irresponsible and incredibly selfish with her money. I knew she would never properly prepare for your massive future, no matter how much she claimed otherwise." He stood up from the soft couch and walked quickly toward a beautiful oak desk in the corner of the room. He opened the top drawer and pulled out a thick, bright blue folder, bringing it right back to me immediately. He handed it to me with immense, glowing pride in his kind eyes. "The exact day you were born, I legally opened a 529 college savings plan in your name," he explained happily. "It is a strictly protected educational trust fund. Your mother could not legally touch a single penny of it, even during the terrible divorce." I slowly opened the heavy blue folder, completely terrified to look at the printed financial statements inside. When my wet eyes finally focused on the bold black numbers at the bottom of the crisp page, my jaw instantly dropped in total shock. It was not just a tiny, insignificant savings account. Through extremely wise investments and constant monthly deposits over 18 years, the total balance was well over $100,000 today. "You have a full, absolutely completely paid ride to literally any state university you want to attend," he whispered softly, his deep voice completely filled with joy. I started sobbing uncontrollably all over again, burying my wet face entirely into my shaking hands. The stark, overwhelming contrast between my 2 completely different parents was completely impossible to fully ignore now. The woman, who constantly claimed she loved me deeply, had violently thrown me into the cold street with absolutely nothing but garbage bags yesterday. The man I had relentlessly hated for 6 long years had secretly built a massive, completely unbreakable financial fortress to perfectly protect my precious future. He had always been my true protector, silently watching over me from a very painful distance entirely alone. He wrapped his strong arms around me tightly, letting me completely cry out the remaining heavy toxicity my mother had deeply infected me with forever. When my heavy tears finally subsided completely, he gently wiped my red cheeks with a soft tissue. "We are going to officially get you enrolled in a wonderful university this week," he promised firmly. "But we are also going to find you an incredibly great therapist immediately. You have suffered massive parental alienation and severe emotional abuse for 18 entire years. We need to properly heal your beautiful mind before you conquer the entire world." I nodded eagerly in total agreement, feeling an incredibly massive weight permanently lifting off my completely exhausted shoulders now. For the very first time in my entire adult life, I actually felt totally safe, completely secure, and deeply loved unconditionally. I unpacked my heavy black garbage bags in my beautiful new bedroom that sunny afternoon, carefully placing my clothes into the spacious wooden dresser. Every single item I neatly folded felt like a tiny, victorious step away from my terrible past. I was no longer a terrified hostage completely trapped in a dark, highly manipulative suburban nightmare at all today. Over the next few fast weeks, my incredible father helped me completely transfer my high school records and officially register for my highly anticipated university classes. I started visiting a wonderful therapist who expertly guided me through the incredibly painful process of truly understanding my mother's extreme narcissism. I began to finally flourish in my bright new environment, entirely surrounded by genuine love instead of terrible transactional demands. I did not realize that while I was happily building a completely beautiful new future, my highly arrogant mother was rapidly plummeting into an incredibly deep, entirely inescapable financial black hole forever. 3 entire years passed by in what felt like a truly beautiful, incredibly fast blur of total happiness and massive personal growth. I was 21 years old now, finishing my junior year of college with a completely flawless academic record. The sprawling university campus had quickly become my favorite place in the entire world, totally filled with wonderful new friends and incredibly supportive professors. I was proudly studying business finance, determined to deeply understand the exact economic principles my manipulative mother had ruthlessly weaponized against my innocent father for 18 long, terribly painful years in the very dark past. My relationship with my incredible dad had completely flourished into an absolutely unbreakable, deeply loving bond that I cherished entirely every single day. We spent our sunny weekends happily hiking beautiful mountain trails, constantly cooking massive Sunday dinners together, and slowly rebuilding the precious time my terrible mother had maliciously stolen from us. Thanks to my incredibly patient therapist, I had successfully processed the massive trauma of my sudden eviction. I no longer felt any intense anger or deep sadness when I looked back at my completely fake childhood. I just felt a profoundly deep, incredibly peaceful sense of closure. While I was steadily climbing toward a completely bright, highly successful future, my mother was rapidly plummeting into a very dark, totally inescapable financial abyss. I had intentionally blocked her phone number the exact day I moved in with my amazing dad, completely cutting off her toxic access to my brand new life. But you simply cannot hide from extremely loud family gossip forever. News of her absolute downfall slowly trickled down to me through heavily whispered phone calls from my older cousins. They eagerly shared the completely shocking details of her incredibly massive, utterly embarrassing suburban destruction, almost always. Without the massive $3,500 monthly subsidy secretly funding her highly lavish lifestyle, my mother completely panicked. She tried desperately to maintain her incredibly arrogant facade, absolutely refusing to cut back on her incredibly expensive salon appointments or cancel her luxury gym memberships. But her tiny part-time paycheck from the extremely slow retail boutique could not even properly cover the minimum payments on her deeply overdrawn credit cards. Within just 6 short months of maliciously kicking me out onto the cold street, her completely fake financial house of cards violently collapsed under immense pressure entirely today. The very first terrible thing to legally disappear was her perfectly pristine, heavily leased luxury car. According to my highly amused cousin, a loud tow truck arrived at her beautiful suburban house very early one bright Tuesday morning. All of her completely shocked neighbors stood directly on their green lawns, quietly watching in total disbelief as the heavy repo truck dragged her prized silver vehicle away forever. She desperately ran outside in a very expensive silk bathrobe, screaming violently at the incredibly calm driver. But she was entirely powerless to actually stop the incredibly humiliating repossession process from finishing completely. After the massive car repossession completely destroyed her highly curated neighborhood reputation, things rapidly became much worse for her. She was entirely forced to quit her incredibly easy boutique job and desperately search for full-time employment to simply survive. But she possessed absolutely no real marketable skills, having relied entirely on my innocent existence to heavily subsidize her entire adult life. She finally landed a highly stressful, totally demanding customer service position that completely exhausted her daily. She was finally experiencing the incredibly harsh, highly unforgiving reality of the exact real world she had constantly threatened me with always. Her highly affluent, incredibly judgmental circle of wealthy friends abandoned her almost instantly. The exact women who previously praised her deeply fake financial independence suddenly stopped inviting her to their incredibly expensive wine tasting trips and lavish charity galas entirely. Without her shiny luxury car or her massive designer clothing budget, she simply could not keep up with their incredibly high society demands anymore. She was entirely isolated, deeply miserable, and completely drowning in a massive ocean of severely defaulted debt. Her perfectly manicured, highly deceptive suburban illusion had absolutely shattered into millions of completely unfixable, deeply jagged, terrible pieces. Whenever my chatty cousins eagerly relayed these deeply satisfying stories of absolute cosmic karma to me over the bright phone, I felt an incredibly strange, totally profound sense of intense emotional peace. I did not actually gloat about her massive downfall, and I never secretly rejoiced in her terrible daily suffering. I simply realized that the vast universe was naturally correcting a massively terrible wrong entirely on its own perfectly timed schedule. I was completely safe now, entirely surrounded by genuine love, while she was actively paying the incredibly high price for choosing terrible greed over her only innocent daughter. But karma was absolutely not completely finished with her deeply miserable life just yet. As the terribly bleak winter of my junior year slowly approached the frozen university campus, her absolutely massive financial problems finally reached an entirely critical, totally unmanageable breaking point, forever. Her deeply underwater mortgage had gone completely unpaid for far too many long months, triggering a massive, highly aggressive foreclosure process immediately. Completely desperate, entirely alone, and officially out of highly manipulative options, she finally decided to make one terribly misguided, incredibly frantic phone call to the very daughter she had ruthlessly discarded 3 years ago. It was a freezing Tuesday evening in late November when my cell phone suddenly vibrated violently across my wooden study desk. I was deeply engrossed in a massive corporate finance textbook, happily preparing for my highly anticipated final exams today. I casually glanced down at the glowing screen, completely expecting a quick text message from my wonderful father about our upcoming dinner plans. Instead, the bright digital display flashed an incredibly familiar, deeply terrifying 10-digit phone number that I had intentionally blocked 3 entire years ago. I stared completely frozen, my heart suddenly hammering fiercely against my ribcage immediately. I had recently updated my phone software, accidentally disabling the strict block feature I had so carefully established. Now, the exact woman who threw me away like garbage was desperately calling me. I let the phone ring loudly in the quiet room for 5 completely agonizing seconds, debating whether to simply reject the incoming call entirely. But a powerful surge of intense curiosity, completely fueled by the incredible stories of her massive financial downfall, finally pushed me to answer. I took a very deep breath, swiped the glowing green icon, and slowly brought the small device to my ear. "Hello," I answered firmly, my voice completely steady and entirely devoid of any warm emotion. There was a sharp, highly dramatic gasp on the other end of the line. "Alex, my beautiful darling. Is that really you?" my mother cried out, her voice dripping with an incredibly fake, totally sickening sweetness. "I have missed you so incredibly much every single day since you ruthlessly abandoned me." I rolled my eyes deeply at her totally ridiculous rewriting of our terrible history. "I did not abandon you," I replied coldly. "You literally packed my bags and kicked me out completely homeless." She completely ignored my entirely factual correction, launching instantly into her highly rehearsed, terribly dramatic sob story without a single hesitation. "Oh, sweetie, things have been so incredibly difficult for me lately," she wailed loudly, forcing fake tears into her terribly strained voice. "The terrible economy has been absolutely brutal, and my horrible boss maliciously fired me last month. Now, the cruel bank is aggressively threatening to immediately foreclose on our beautiful family home. I am completely terrified, deeply alone, and totally desperate for a tiny miracle today." You are the absolute only person I have left in life." I sat completely silent, letting her totally frantic words hang heavily in the cold air. She finally took a massive, shaking breath and delivered her incredibly audacious demand. "I desperately need you to absolutely co-sign a massive personal loan for me tomorrow morning," she begged urgently. "I know you are incredibly smart and doing very well in college now. With your pristine credit and my amazing house as collateral, we can easily save our precious family memories. Just sign the paperwork, and I will strictly pay every single monthly installment myself. You will absolutely not have to worry." Her absolutely staggering entitlement was truly breathtaking to behold in real time today. She genuinely believed I was still the highly anxious, easily manipulated teenager she had ruthlessly abused for 18 entire years. She completely expected me to instantly sacrifice my incredibly bright, financially secure future just to violently rescue her from the exact, massive consequences of her own terrible greed. I felt absolutely zero pity for her extremely pathetic situation. The very deep, incredibly peaceful closure my amazing therapist helped me successfully achieve completely shielded my beautiful mind from her highly toxic, deeply manipulative emotional blackmail entirely right now. "No," I stated clearly, my firm voice echoing loudly in the completely quiet study room. There was an incredibly sudden, terribly heavy silence on the dark phone line. "What did you just say to me?" she hissed dangerously, her extremely fake sweet tone instantly vanishing into thin air entirely. I said absolutely no. I repeated very calmly, "I am not co-signing any terrible loans for you, and I am certainly not giving you a single dollar of my deeply hard-earned money today. Your massive financial disaster is entirely your own terrible fault. Please do not call me." The incredibly fragile mask completely slipped off her terribly angry face immediately. "You ungrateful, totally selfish little brat!" She screamed violently into the small receiver, her immense rage fully exploding like a massive, terrible volcano now. "I gave you absolutely everything for 18 long years, and this is exactly how you ruthlessly repay my incredible maternal sacrifice today? You owe me your entire miserable life completely!" She completely lost her terrible mind, hurling intensely vicious insults and incredibly dark threats rapidly through the dark phone. But her immense anger completely failed to trigger my previous childhood trauma entirely today. I simply pulled the loud phone away from my ear, pressed the bright red button firmly, and permanently disconnected her extremely toxic voice from my beautiful life forever. I instantly blocked her terrible number again, successfully ensuring she could never constantly harass my peaceful existence anymore. But as I sat perfectly still in my quiet room, her highly frantic words about the massive bank foreclosure violently echoed inside my fast-racing mind immediately. I quickly called my incredible dad right away, absolutely completely unaware that we were about to finally uncover the most devastating legal plot twist ever imaginable. I immediately dialed my incredible father's number, my fingers trembling slightly against the bright glowing screen. When he finally answered his ringing phone, I quickly recounted the absolutely frantic, entirely unhinged conversation I just survived with my extremely desperate mother. I explained her massive financial collapse, the completely terrifying bank foreclosure threats, and her highly manipulative demand for a huge personal loan signature today. My dad listened very quietly, completely absorbing the highly dramatic details without interrupting me once. When I finally finished my extremely rushed story, he let out a very low, incredibly thoughtful chuckle over the line now. "Alex," he said softly, his deep voice completely vibrating with incredibly calm confidence, "she absolutely cannot sell that beautiful suburban house without you right now." I completely frowned in total confusion, staring blankly at my dark bedroom wall. "What do you mean by that?" I asked quickly. She has always claimed she owned that massive property entirely free and clear since the terrible divorce. My dad sighed very heavily, absolutely prepared to finally reveal the greatest legal secret he had meticulously kept hidden for 18 entire years. We are visiting my incredibly sharp lawyer first thing tomorrow, sunny morning completely. The very next morning, we drove directly to an incredibly pristine, highly professional law office situated perfectly in the bustling downtown business district. We were immediately greeted by an incredibly distinguished older gentleman wearing a perfectly tailored gray suit entirely. He warmly shook my father's hand and offered me a very kind, completely reassuring smile right away. He quickly led us into his massive corner office, deeply lined with heavy legal books and beautiful mahogany furniture everywhere. Sitting completely still in the exact center of his entirely spotless wooden desk was a very thick, heavily dusty brown legal folder today. This incredibly vital folder holds the exact original terms of your parents' completely bitter divorce settlement forever, the very kind lawyer explained gently to me today. Your highly manipulative mother demanded the entire suburban house completely outright during those absolutely brutal legal negotiations long ago. But your incredibly brilliant father completely refused to blindly surrender his deeply hard-earned property without securing a massive legal guarantee for your beautiful future. He strictly forced her to sign a highly specific, totally binding protective legal trust agreement before he finally signed the extremely important settlement paperwork, completely officially for her entirely forever. He carefully opened the thick brown folder and completely removed a heavily stamped document, printed on very crisp white paper exactly. The incredible twist is absolutely brilliant, the lawyer continued happily, pointing a silver pen directly at a highly highlighted legal paragraph entirely. Your mother never actually owned that massive house completely free and clear at all. The entire property was legally placed into a deeply protective trust, entirely overseen by my professional law firm today. She was only granted the strict legal right to simply reside inside the expensive home while she actively raised you during your entire childhood. However, the exact moment you legally turned 18 years old, that protective trust automatically completely dissolved forever. The lawyer smiled very widely, his incredibly sharp eyes absolutely gleaming with intense professional pride right now. Upon the official dissolution of that specific legal trust, you automatically became an equal legal owner of that beautiful suburban property completely. You legally own exactly 50% of all available home equity today. Your mother absolutely cannot sell, refinance, or completely modify that exact massive property without your official legal signature explicitly entirely granting her the highly required permission to finally proceed safely forward, always. I sat absolutely stunned in the soft leather chair, my highly shocked mind furiously racing to fully understand this truly massive revelation entirely. My totally ignorant mother had ruthlessly evicted me on my 18th birthday, precisely because she wrongly assumed my extreme financial utility had finally expired completely. She never fully bothered to actually read the incredibly dense legal paperwork she aggressively signed during her highly vindictive divorce battle long ago. She completely thought kicking me violently out of the massive house entirely severed our absolute connection forever. Instead, her terribly arrogant action perfectly cemented my total financial power completely. I have already been officially contacted by her deeply frustrated real estate agent yesterday afternoon, the lawyer casually continued while smoothly closing the heavy brown folder entirely. Your totally panicked mother actually found a wealthy cash buyer entirely willing to absolutely purchase the home completely under true market value to barely avoid terrible foreclosure today. However, the official title company immediately flagged the extremely complicated legal deed completely correctly. They completely refused to finally authorize the absolute sale without your highly necessary personal signature entirely securing the vital legal release of your massive financial ownership thoroughly and completely right away. I looked directly at my deeply smiling father, an incredibly powerful wave of immense legal justice completely washing over my entirely excited soul right now. The exact woman who threw me completely away like utterly worthless garbage now desperately needed me to actively save her entirely ruined life completely. But I was absolutely not going to blindly sign my highly valuable equity completely away for absolutely nothing today. The lawyer rapidly drafted an extremely strict legal document, officially demanding my completely rightful 50% share, entirely immediately. We officially scheduled the ultimate final closing meeting for tomorrow morning, completely today. The very next morning, my incredible father and I confidently entered the bright glass conference room of the busy downtown title agency, completely prepared. My highly anxious mother was already sitting rigidly at the massive, polished wooden table entirely alone today. She looked absolutely exhausted, deeply terrified, and completely stripped of her previous incredibly arrogant suburban glamour entirely. Her extremely fake designer clothes were wrinkled, and her highly tense posture practically screamed massive absolute defeat completely. When the heavy glass door clicked shut, she slowly raised her highly tearful eyes to finally look directly at her entirely successful daughter completely. Her highly shocked expression instantly transformed into an incredibly deep scowl the exact moment she fully registered my totally calm father standing powerfully beside me. She absolutely never expected him to actually accompany me to this highly crucial financial meeting today. The extremely sharp closing attorney swiftly distributed the thick stacks of heavily printed legal documents directly across the smooth wooden surface completely. He politely cleared his throat and strictly explained the precise mathematical breakdown of this highly forced property sale entirely right now. The total financial reality was absolutely devastating for my entirely ruined, completely defeated mother, completely today. The massive cash buyer was purchasing the incredibly large home for exactly $800,000 entirely. Because my absolutely brilliant father had legally established the highly protective trust correctly, I was completely entitled to exactly $400,000, completely free and entirely clear today. However, my utterly irresponsible mother had completely drained her personal equity entirely by pulling multiple extremely reckless second mortgages repeatedly. After absolutely paying off her totally massive defaulted loans and incredibly high closing costs completely, her exact remaining financial portion was utterly reduced to a highly pathetic, truly tiny $15,000 completely today. She stared completely blankly at the highly detailed final settlement sheet, entirely shaking. The incredibly harsh reality of her utterly massive financial disaster completely crushed her incredibly fake arrogance entirely. She looked directly across the completely smooth wooden table at my incredibly calm, perfectly poised face right now. "Alex," she whispered incredibly weakly, completely forcing extremely fake, deeply pathetic tears into her very tired eyes again. "You absolutely cannot legally take all that massive money away from me completely today. I am your totally loving mother, and I desperately need a highly significant portion to completely survive entirely right now." I leaned forward in my comfortable leather chair, looking deeply into her desperate, completely terrified eyes without a single ounce of pity today. "I am very sorry," I replied coldly, my steady voice directly echoing her exact terrible words from my 18th birthday eviction entirely. "But you really should have planned much better. I have my own beautiful future to carefully pay for right now, and you are officially a massive financial liability to me today. I am not your personal safety net anymore, and this highly toxic arrangement is now permanently terminated forever, without any further discussion here today." She completely gasped out loud, absolutely horrified to finally hear her own incredibly vicious cruelty actively weaponized directly against her entirely. She violently buried her terribly angry face deep into her shaking hands and began to loudly sob completely uncontrollably right there. I entirely ignored her highly dramatic, completely fake emotional performance entirely. I smoothly reached directly across the wide table, firmly picked up the heavy black silver pen, and beautifully signed my full legal name onto the incredibly thick closing document completely. The incredibly smooth dark ink permanently severed our absolute final remaining connection entirely, completely, and forever today. The highly professional attorney quickly gathered the perfectly signed legal paperwork into a very neat, entirely thick stack completely. He officially handed me a highly certified, absolutely beautiful bank check, carefully printed for exactly $400,000 completely today. I slowly folded the extremely crisp paper and safely placed it deeply into my warm coat pocket entirely. I gracefully stood up from the comfortable leather chair, feeling completely lighter than I had ever truly felt in my entire young life entirely. The massive, totally invisible weight of my highly abusive childhood had completely vanished entirely right now, forever today. My incredible father proudly placed his incredibly warm, extremely strong hand directly upon my upper back completely right now. We absolutely turned around and confidently walked directly toward the heavy glass office door together without ever looking backward entirely. My deeply miserable mother remained entirely completely frozen in her highly isolated chair, fully crying over her totally pathetic $15,000 check entirely. She was completely broken, highly alone, and absolutely facing the extremely terrifying consequences of her completely own incredibly terrible greed forever today. We proudly exited the beautiful professional building and stepped outside into the very bright sunlight. I successfully graduated at the top of my competitive university class exactly 1 short year after that absolutely satisfying final meeting entirely today. With my completely protected trust fund and my beautiful home equity cash completely secured, I proudly bought my very own beautiful starter home entirely debt-free today. My amazing dad happily helped me beautifully paint my incredibly stunning new living room walls perfectly yesterday. I was utterly homeless and totally terrified on my 18th birthday long ago. But today I am incredibly powerful, highly successful, deeply secure, completely free, and truly loved unconditionally by my real family.